So we've got Keith, the tireless moderator of the last panel. We have we've Kellee, Shelley, and Rich, and you managed to sit in the order that I have. Did you do that deliberately? Okay, wow, that was really impressive. Self-organized in the right order. I'm just going to give a little bit of context on this before kicking it off with a few questions. We did a really interesting panel, Casual Connect Europe, this year, and it started out, there's a lot of alternate financing sources for, just making a game. One of the things, when I started my first games company, I was always sort of confused, or maybe I was just greedy, that I had to give away 30% of my company just because I wanted to make a game. In Europe, there tends to be project financing sources, but on that panel, we quickly sort of devolved into a discussion really about how what financiers look for, particularly in project financing, and how a developer can, I guess, represent themselves properly. So that's the theme of this one. Why am I here? I run a kids games company. We are Series A funded, that's what I do by day. A few years ago, again, with that thesis of why should I give away 30% of my company, I established a fund with some colleagues in the UK called the Tesseract Fund, which focuses in project financing, back Calvino Noir, LA Cops, Deadbeat Heroes, Black Death, Kings and Men, a lot of projects, more than 50 projects. So I'm going to start off with the panel. I'm sorry, I haven't introduced the panel properly. I'm hoping you can kind of introduce yourselves, or that my first question will serve as an intro. Keith, we had your colleague Jason Della Rocca on the panel in Europe. And since then, I remember reading an article saying that Execution Labs was moving away from acceleration, focusing in fewer, larger projects. And your quote was, instead of lots of $50,000 checks, we'll be writing a smaller number of up to, in brackets, $500,000. I'm curious if you think that's an issue, like indicative of a wider trend in game development, or do you still think that a shoestring indie can get a game to market and deliver an investor return?
Well, I think first of all, thanks for having me on the panel. I think it's a little bit of industry and a little bit of our own sort of internal mechanics. So we did start off 4 years ago doing sort of what you would think of as accelerator, incubator type activities, where we would put $50,000, $100,000 into a new studio of veteran developers who were coming together for the first time, and they would actually come up to Montreal, where most of us are based, and spend a long time there, and we would help with the whole sort of market launch cycle. That was 4 years ago. And so a couple of things have changed. One is I do think the market has gotten much, much more competitive, and that's really across platforms, across business models. So we do investing for free-to-play, premium, PC, mobile. It really doesn't matter to us. And in all of those instances, the market's gotten harder to enter, we think. So that usually means more capital, right? And so that also probably means a slightly more seasoned team. And so that's one of the reasons that we have said, okay, let's put 400 or 500K into these studios instead of giving them 100K and let them sort of sweat it out and really hope that they can make something work on a shoestring. And then I think the other thing is just, based on the way we operate, we are not the kind of investors who hand you a check and sit back for the board meetings and show up and give you advice. We have a full team on staff, do BI, UX, UI, product. So we are in the weeds investors. So we are working on the product. And when you're talking about doing, 12 investments a year, over a few years, you're certainly looking at a portfolio of 36 studios, and we just didn't feel like we could provide ongoing support at the level we want to. So we're sort of doing fewer, larger deals now.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a little while. For people who don't know Kellee, Kellee, you're currently with Google, but very actively involved and co-founder on the IndieFund, and formerly that game company, which I said I wouldn't get all fanboy about, so I won't.
You have to be. Everyone loves the game company. Oh my God!
But Kellee, I'd like to ask you about IndieFund. I'd like to hear a little bit about the background, its objectives, how you came about with this idea for a fund. I think we'd also like to hear about that game company in terms of how you started out trying to get your first projects funded too.
Yeah, and certainly they're kind of related. So that game company we started in 2006. was a time when people didn't go indie. It wasn't a cool thing to do or seen as feasible. So in order to grow a team quickly to kind of do this project we wanted to do after school, long story short, like one of the best ways to go about that was entering into a publishing agreement with Sony, which kind of provided some stability, right, to people for the people that we were looking to hire and bring on. It was a 3-game deal, so they had first right of refusal on projects, and there are all sorts of clauses around that. But essentially, it was to do 3 games for PlayStation Network, and just like any traditional publishing deal, there was a recoup plus like an additional recoup of internal funds that they were spending on the project, and then they would see the vast majority of revenue. And that was kind of like typical at the time. It was either that kind of deal, which was really structured around projects that would cost millions of dollars to make, or VC investments, which were similar in style. Like the terms were sort of related to this idea that the amount of money that you would need from them was really huge. And no one was pivoting very quickly at the time to sort of create new deal structures that kind of recognize the fact that the financial risk of independent projects at the time was so much lower. And so in 2010, a bunch of us indie developers who had seen some success in the independent game scene sort of saw this opportunity in that, like many of our developer friends, kind of only needed tens of thousands, maybe $100,000 to get their game to a level at which it could be commercially successful, like maybe bring on an artist or have that additional level of polish, or simply self-sustain, like to get to, so they could focus only on the one project for a few months to get it out the door. And again, like the deals available to get that money were so kind of egregious that we decided to kind of flip that on its head and create a model that recognized kind of the lower risk of the investments, and to help these developers get and hopefully stay financially independent afterwards.
Great. I'm curious again, so 2010, 2016, a lot's happened in the market since then. Yeah. How has that impacted your investment activity?
Yeah, I mean, it's much more competitive now. Developers need to have a certain amount of skill on their team or demonstrated ability to promote their own projects. We often will give like additional funds if we think it's necessary to hire the right talent for that. But that's just not something we used to think about in the past. Because our services as a fund, it's kind of a side project for everyone involved. Yeah. So we don't do that, unlike execution labs, like we don't do that ourselves. It's on the developer. And that kind of makes it a more narrow slice of the kinds of developers that are a fit for that model.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. I think that's of particular interest in terms of what indies need to do for investors in many ways. Shelley, IPC Capital, we met a couple of years ago. It's been going about 3 years. We met a couple of years ago. I think you just appointed Inafune-san as an advisor. We're doing some focus on the Japanese indie market, but I know you invest globally across Europe. Love to hear about your fund and particularly, some projects, how you approach the market and the sort of investments that you make.
Right. So IPC Ventures essentially is a mobile first focus fund. So we invest in sort of like other VC style technology companies, but we, because of influence and also our exposure in Japan of the gaming market, so we're quite active in the gaming space for about 2+ years. We started off thinking a bit more on the Japanese market, but I think we really think the global market is really more interesting for us because we like to sort of discover talents in the underserved market, especially maybe Nordic regions or whatnot, and then we will have the experience network in Asia to help these developers to bring their products, their games to the Asia market. But overall, we are we're pretty bullish about the mobile gaming sector, and particularly in the free-to-play. We're not exactly interested in the premium space or console, PC, Steam, all that yet. But it's just because we are focusing in the global market. If you look at the growth rate for Asia and a lot of different markets, your mobile devices is getting much higher penetration, much more advanced than your PC can catch up, right? In terms of technology, in terms of the usage and media, app consumption. So that's our thesis. But overall, our approach, our discipline is very similar to the venture investment. I come from the venture background, and also I come from the entrepreneurship background, meaning I've started a company and sold it, and then I have been sort of different sides of the table, like in M&A before and all that. So approach is very similar. We try to bring the discipline from the venture side to hopefully a good model to the gaming space, meaning we really focus on, number one, the team, and then vision, and finally execution. So I think I've come across a lot of good creative idea, but not something they can execute to provide a sustainable free-to-play games. Because at the end of the day, free-to-play game is a service, not just a product. And that's what we're interested in. I invested in Pinterest, in Viber, and all different sort of social consumer ventures. I think those might not be easy to build at the beginning, but if they really hit the tipping point, kind of jump on the hockey stick path, it's really pretty, right? So that's where we're really targeting.
Great.
By all means, we're not really filtering out those who don't have the experience in the free-to-play, and that's really why we can add value, because we understand the free-to-play model really well. If you have good, promising idea and good prototype and commitment, then we can help you. We can provide you funding. We can provide you advice and mentorship, and also at the end, really the commercial part of it is really help you to find the right publishing partners.
Great. Rich, you are not an investor. You have, Hyperkinetic. You went the Kickstarter route for Epic Tavern. I'm really curious to hear about that, why you chose that route, and in particular, what was attractive about it over, let's say, going project financing or venture financing, and how the hell are you making that game for 60 large?
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, I guess I'm the pig on this panel, and if anybody's got any lipstick, I'll take it gladly. So okay, full disclosure, my history is as a AAA games developer for consoles, and I was safely ensconced within the walls of Treyarch for many years, then working along with Sega, and then I worked at Sony Pictures before venturing off on our own. And one of the things, is anybody in here, who in here is developers? Okay. Yeah, so I don't know if you're AAA developers or not, but basically when you're in those, when I say ensconced in the walls, I really mean it. Like, we knew nothing about financing our game, right? We knew nothing about running a company. The way we started off the company is we just said, well, we're going to do work for hire. We're going to do client work. We're going to make all sorts of products. We don't even really care what. And we're going to take that money and we're going to use it to build the game that we want to build. So we did that for a while, and then we came up with the idea for our game, Epic Tavern. And we said, well, this is going to take a lot more money than the money that we're getting through the work for hire stuff that we're doing. So what we did is we went to friends and family. We actually got one of the founders of Treyarch to give us money as well. We raised about $300,000 on our own, like $300,000 to $350,000, including some money that we put into it ourselves as founders. And Then we decided to supplement that by actually going the Kickstarter route. As somebody that was on the panel before said, it's a real shitty route to go on.
That was me.
That was you? It is a real shitty route to go on.
I'm sorry, when was that you did that?
That was last month.
Okay, just last month.
Yeah, so it's probably, as they were noting, game funding for video games, for digital games, is about, what, like half of what it was even last year? So I'm really happy that we even funded. But what we did going into it is we said, look, we don't need the money. And that's kind of, it might seem like a little bit dishonest or misleading, but, we didn't need it. And we were playing with that in the description that we put on our Kickstarter. We said what we need this money for is to build additional features, to polish, to put more music into it, whatever. But the reason why we did the Kickstarter was to basically have it as our debutante ball for our audience, and to build a community and to get notice of the game. So yeah, I would 100% agree with what you said. It's not, if you're really looking to fund your game, unless you're an individual and you know that you can live on, whatever, your mom's given you, or your wife or your husband or whatever, I wouldn't go the Kickstarter route. It's definitely not guaranteed. You're going to put into it about as much money as you get out of it, unless you're a board game. If you're doing it for board games, that might be the way to go. But for digital games, I would really warn against doing that. And that's, as a company, we funded at almost 200% of what our goal was, which we set purposefully pretty low, just so we could achieve it. Right? Nobody likes an empty restaurant. Is I guess the kind of thing that I would say, and it's absolutely true.
How much did you guys raise again? Sorry.
We raised $69,000 so far. And then we transitioned it over into a PayPal campaign after that. So
I'm going to come back to that as part of this next question, because I hadn't realized that. Well, I'm kind of relieved that you're not making the game for $69,000. But I'm curious as to how you pitched, particularly Treyarch founder, and how you got people to believe in you as a developer that you were going to be able to deliver this game. And that's what I'm coming to. I'd really like to know what people look for in developers and their projects. What sort of a sense are you getting? Right? For the Tesseract Fund, I know that they look for strong referrals, look for strong self-starters, look for people, in fact, I think that all of the financing is done through referral only. Look for people who've maybe spun out of another indie. We call them MacGyvers, people who can just make anything themselves. Somebody comes in with a budget and they say, well, we're going to spend $20,000 on the best soundtrack ever. I'm thinking, well, you know what? Like, look at all these other games, and they've spent $500, or they've pulled in favors, that sort of thing. That's what we sort of look for, because we have a cap of about $200,000 per investment. But I'm curious as to what others look for.
I think Shelley and I's answer is probably going to be very different than Kelly's, because we're financial investors, or we're looking for VC style returns. Now, what I may look at for a return may be a little bit different than what Phil in the previous panel looks for in return, but we're still looking at sort of at least an opportunity to make 10x our investment, right? So if we're putting $300K into your studio, do that math, right? And so so fundamentally, your studio needs to have the ability, with whatever you're making now and whatever you plan to build in the next 5 to 7 years, to generate enough value for us to eventually to make that money. Now, of course, it won't always do that, but you have to have that has to be a possibility. So if you're coming to me and you're saying, we have a 10-hour single-player game that we're going to put up on Steam, and we think that Firewatch did this, and so we can do this. That might be a really sort of nice return for a publisher and for you as a founder of your studio, but for us, that's just really not something we can do. Now, but if you're telling me, this first game is this Firewatch thing, and then the next game is going to be a sort of multiplayer social experience that can really scale, but we're going to build that off of the infrastructure that we have for this first game, that's a different conversation. So fundamentally, the economics of the business you're building have to be there.
So from a project investment perspective, what gets you excited when you see a developer coming into Kellee? What makes you really think that, okay, this is something the developer has got the pitch just right, and it's something we'd like to invest in.
Yeah, and I just realized it's important to note that also IndieFund is project-based investment, not company-based investment. And totally, as Keith was saying too, like the value proposition, like the return we're looking on our investments is very different. And so, and kind of depends on the nature of the project. We're looking certainly for projects that couldn't exist without us. I think everyone looks for that. I think the bullet points are very similar in a lot of ways. Projects that we think are really unique, not only because we're interested in enabling new voices and unique voices in game development, but also because those stand out in the marketplace, in a very crowded marketplace. A demonstrated ability to execute in some fashion, whether that's that they have a very fleshed out vertical slice or prototype when they come to us, or they have a strong track record when they come to us. And then a kind of thought out or solid like go-to-market strategy. Here's the competitive market landscape. I've thought about realistically, how is this game going to perform? There's a lot of information just publicly available now, so that's just something not only that's nice to see, but it's almost kind of it's a measure of like how real or serious they are about the project. Like it doesn't take that much to research and think through that. So, do you go through a formal scoring process against certain points? For example, if they come to you with a publisher, will they get extra because it reduces risk or little, or how do you actually assess?
You guys don't work with publishers, right?
What's that?
You guys don't do deals with publishers, do you?
Oh, we don't often, because our standard deal terms are to see 100% recoup initially, and then a 25% recoup until we've doubled that initial investment, and then we're completely out of the project. So that's something that it's hard to negotiate at that point, but you know, there's always exceptions to that rule. Sorry, what was the?
No, it's fine. We'll come back to that. Yeah, I'd like to hear from Shelley on on this in terms of what you look for, what you would like to see somebody coming into, particularly with a game project, what they're coming in with, as opposed to what you can provide for them.
Yeah, I think obviously they would come with a solid game prototype and idea. But then we are also looking for the longer term, because we're investing in the company, not just the game. So it's really sort of a more holistic view on how they think about the market and where they're going after for like 5 years. I know it's hard for this space, but so we are actually, I'm going to divide my investment into two sort of buckets. From now on is really, one is more like typical sort of mobile game investment, and then I'm also looking at something more sort of forward-thinking, more future technology-driven, and maybe they were building something with a platform very high barrier of entry of tech and such. So that would be very interesting. And for me, I think we're not just looking at just gaming, really looking at the user experience, really the entertainment side of things, and the digital media as an overall sort of pillar for us. So, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to the game, we have a team pretty experienced about dissecting the game. They play games like every day, 16 hours a day, and really look at the monetization mechanics, the game loop, retention, UI, UX, all the sort of important aspects to make a game successful in the market. And that's where we have a score sheet and really it's very systematic how we look at it.
Okay. Okay, now turning it around, Rich, how did you convince people to give you $300,000? That's a really, really difficult amount of money to raise.
Yes.
Yeah, so what was your, if you can't remember it, it's fine, what was your elevator pitch to those investors? I
mean, what we did is we basically put together a deck. The idea of Epic Tavern is very compelling as well. So there's different components of it, right? It's, the presentation, it is having a compelling idea that grabs people and and makes them want to play it, right? And then, you know, proving that we can do it, right, is another thing. Convincing them that we are a team that can do that. It wasn't difficult for us to do that because, you know, we've made lots and lots and lots of games before. I mean, I've been doing it for like 17 years, and Tomo's been doing it for, you know, more than 20 years, and Dave for like 15. Between the three of us, we've sold like maybe 40 million games, you know, or more. So it's like, you know, we can do it, but at the same time, it's like, you know, we could do it on the console, right? Working in big companies. So that was part of the difficulty of being able to pitch to them, hey, that we can do this as a small company. So one of the things that helped with that is that we had been around for about a year before we started going out and looking for money from other people. We'd worked together as a team. We'd proven that we can complete projects across all different sorts of spaces. Yeah, I mean, it was, and then it was just basically putting all that together in a presentation, and you know, kind of pitching it with the game to people. The game is really sticky. We went through our green light. When they scooped us out of green light, we were at number 14 out of 2,200 games, and we were compared against your average top 50 game, we're about 2 to 3 times more likely to be followed or favorited than you know, your average top 50 game. So.
If I can just jump on,
yeah, of course.
Jump on this. So it's interesting. I mean, because we do get lots of pitches from veteran game developers who's like, you know, we've been working at, you know, Treyarch or whatever for 15 or 20 years, and so now we're starting our own thing. A critical piece of what you mentioned there was, has this team demonstrated that they can hit certain milestones working outside of the confines, you know, of that system, right? And so that is a huge, huge thing for us, because it's one thing to be able to, you know, to manage a team of 200 people or whatever it is. It's altogether different to be, you know, 8, 10, I don't know how big your team is, maybe it's 4. Yeah, 14. So that's sort of in our sweet spot, right? That is like for you to come and say, hey, we're looking for investment, and for the last 12 months we've been working together, we've got our own money into this thing, we have some friends and family money, and we have this prototype or this vertical slice or whatever. That is a very different pitch than, hey, we just left Treyarch and like we're awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also like to add one thing. It's like if a developer comes to us and say they have a lot of experience in PC, console, like 20 plus years, actually it's a little bit of alert to us, because they might not have any experience in the mobile space.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The transition is huge. It's not going to be like, you know, from 1 to, you know, 2. It's actually 1 to 10, right? So they have to understand the mobile space enough. And then if they come to us and say, yeah, I know the gaming space really well, 20 plus years, and then I can do the self-publishing, but they've never done it before, because they've done it through the previous job, but it's a big company, that doesn't really prove it, right? So they have to provide relevant track record, not just like sort of mix and match some of the history. Yeah.
So we've covered a number of the questions that I was going to pose through this, but so I'm going to skip forward a little bit in terms of the brief that I'd sent across. I think we've talked a little bit about community reputation. I think that we know that that's something that very, very, very much helps. And you know, once you've made your investment decision, how do you then want to see the execution work from a market building perspective? Is it important for you that, you know, a game develops in the, you know, under the scrutiny of the community, or do you like to see a developer, you know, put their heads down, just get on with it? We're really curious on that.
I mean, you know, I think free-to-play game development is very different, right? Like, but I think generally for indie teams, you know, regardless if you're 2 people or 20 people, I think we've definitely gone past the point. I mean, we've definitely hit the point where open development is almost always a positive. If you guys disagree, you know, I'd love to hear about it. But from our standpoint, we'd much rather our developers be sort of very close to the community and starting to build that enthusiasm. You know, whether maybe you do a Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever to kick that off, but it's just too hard to try to bring a game to market sort of when it's ready, or, you know, when it's in beta. You know, by then it's really too late. I mean, the market has really changed so much that unless you are building that core group of evangelists who are going to talk about the game and get those guilds going if you're doing a free-to-play game, or get on Reddit and talk about it if you're doing a premium game or whatever, I think you've missed the boat altogether. So you have to be open to that from our perspective.
Yeah, we're pretty hands-off as an investment fund, but we're kind of on demand. So say we have this pool of knowledge, and we're happy to support you, but we don't want to be a burden to your project. So I say that because the strongest data point I have about our developers is sort of how much any one of them actually reaches out and contacts us. And what I've noticed is a strong correlation between those that are often recontacting us and asking us for input or feedback or just letting us know what's going on with their project and the success of that project. And my theory is that similarly, like, these are the people that are also most likely to be out at events, talking to other developers, getting early playtest feedback, like building this base of players that then, and journalists that then support their launch when it happens. But yes, definitely statistically really strong correlation between those two things.
Okay, so 2 to 3 developers in this room, they're looking for financing. 2 to 3 most important considerations for them to think about when they're approaching you. When do they know that they're ready? What do they need to have? Is it, we talked about some of these things, so a strong pitch deck, monetization model, but what do you expect that they are the 2 to 3 fundamentals that they will come to you with? Maybe Shelley, you might take that one first.
Yeah, I think the most important part is they know their strength, and then they build their, basically the company based on that strength. So let's say if they're really good developers, just really make sure they can deliver the game. They can really make sure, I think I've seen a lot of developers, they drop, they might be good at just developing the prototype but not the final product. And not to talk about a lot of different things that distract their goal, meaning I've seen a lot of developers these days talking about basically creating merchandising from day one, and then comic books and planning
transmedia companies, right?
Yeah, like transmedia already. I'm like, how's your game coming along? And not really there yet, but the vision is there. So let's say if you're a developer, just focus on that. You're not a comic book, drawer, So that's how I look at it, right? It's usually a small team. If you started thinking about, I need to raise money and increase the team size by double, from 10 to 20, because I need to hire these people to do all these other things, then I think it's not the right things, right? So that's how we look at it, especially for the early stage.
Shelley, maybe I should have phrased the question, what should a developer not do? What's the absolute thing they should not do?
You weren't at the last panel? Come on.
I can tell you one thing. Don't bring a lawyer into the table from day one.
For us, a couple of key things. One is we need to see a prototype. And it can be ugly as hell, that's fine. Gray boxes are totally fine. But we want to see that you have built something. So that's absolutely mandatory. If you're asking for funding, you should have a handle on what that money is going to be used for, how long it's going to last, and how long you think it will be until you're out raising again, or how you're going to generate money. Because oftentimes for us, if we're writing a $300,000 check, that's not going to cover your full project cost, right? So how is it that you need us to help you go out and raise your Series A? Do you have, did you make a bunch of money because you exited some other company? So understanding your financials and sort of, we don't want to write you a check and sort of create a bridge for you that get you halfway across a river, right? It has to get you all the way across a river, or there has to be some sort of milestone that you're going to hit that's going to unlock the rest of the funding you need.
So we have a page on our website, indie-fund.com, that's called Apply. It has all this information, and then also links to this blog post that we wrote out, sort of how to apply for IndieFund and just about anybody else. And I would say follow that. It's the people that apply and have obviously not looked at any of those things is a big turnoff, and people that just tweet at me and tell me they have a great idea for IndieFund when you can apply through our website. is also a turn off. Yeah.
Yeah, I've plenty of anecdotes, so I won't go through them too many. But I remember being told that I didn't know what I was doing, that absolutely their free-to-play game was going to get funded, and they did not need any soft launch period whatsoever. I didn't know what I was talking about, with all due respect. And then 2 weeks later, getting a call back from these people, very, very humble, saying they'd fired that particular partner, but to do something else. But I want to stay on this subject of kind of like investor and project fit. And Rich, I'm going to go back to you on this, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask, and I think it's something actually sometimes developers just look and see money. That's all we need. But actually there's a lot more. And I'd be very, very curious as to get your views on what developers should look for in investors as opposed to the other way around. But Rich, I'm curious, did you say no to any money? Was there anybody that you said, we'd like your money, but no thanks?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We turned down...
What was her name?
Well, actually, okay, so there's a few different things. We wanted it to be a project-based, right?
Yeah.
We didn't want it to be that the people were owning a part of the company, because we felt it was very important to retain control of the way that the company operates.
Oh, okay, hold on. Can I interject here? Because this is something that I hear all the time. Because there's the assumption that a seed stage investor that's going to take a small double digit has any control over what you do company. It's just not true. That's just not the way. So I'm curious,
again, we didn't know anything.
Okay, so let's not spread.
Was it him you took the money from?
I'm sorry.
But that's that. I think
but
you guys invest in project.
No, we're equity investors. We take studio.
SPV.
No, we have done one SPV. And 24 investments were generally just corp investments.
If you can elaborate on that a little.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a real big misconception for game developers, which is like, if I take investment in my studio, suddenly I don't have control over my studio. And the fact is, unless you are giving up a majority of your board seats to of your studio, like there's almost nothing I can do as a 10% equity holder in your studio if you want to make a decision. I mean, there are some things that usually are in place, like you can't sell the company for $1 to your buddy and buy it back. There's like standard protection clauses, but most early stage investors have almost no control over what you do to operate your company. And frankly, we don't want it. I mean, like, imagine. So we've done 24 or so investments over the last few years. We don't take board seats. We don't even want to sit on your board because, frankly, we can't sit on that many boards. There's only 3 of us, basically managing the company, plus the key staff helping the studios. We can't sit on your board. Like, we want to help you, but we don't. Like, you want to put, dragons in your game. Put dragons in your game. Great. But I think it's a big misconception.
One thing we have to understand, people need to understand is for any sort of investment fund, we are doing a portfolio approach. So meaning we're going to have to invest in or get involved with more than 10 or 20 or 30 companies. So there's literally no time and no sort of benefits for us to control your company. And literally, if you give me all the assets from your company, I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, what am I going to do with your? I don't care. What am I going to do with your assets?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Bank account. Then I'm happy, right?
This is all super good information. By the way.
I think the flip side of that misconception, and then let you continue, is also developers who think they want to make a company but actually want to make a project. And so that's part of it. So they'll get investment, or they'll hear those stories because investors want to invest, as they said, like in your company. That's a different goal than I just want to get this one game done. And so, yeah, if you have a partner who's not aligned and your goals aren't aligned, then it can feel off.
Yeah, I mean, and these are all great points, and the developers in the room probably know what I'm talking about when you say, we just didn't know anything. We knew nothing. And when we say somebody is going to be buying a part of our company, we freak out, right? Exactly. And we didn't have any lawyers around. It was just yeah. I mean, and this is and that's the thing, is that the big problem with a lot of indies is that we just don't know anything, right? There's such a big gap in between you guys who are funding the games and the world of investing and everything, and us, and we just don't know anything. I mean, I'm not sure how Kellee started out, but You know, I mean, we just, you know, we learn these things as we go along, right? So, I mean, that was the thing. I mean, we did the company that we turned down was more of they wanted to acquire us to actually have us do certain things for them, and it was and it was for a tremendous amount of money that I regret turning down occasionally, but probably not eventually.
Nothing's worth your creative freedom, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, that's, you know, what we looked for were, you know, people that were enthusiastic about the idea, people that were going to be able to provide mentorship to us and, you know, provide advice to us when we needed it. You know, people that were, you know, were going to be able to, the checks wouldn't bounce when they came through, you know, obviously is another thing. You know, again, we weren't super savvy. We're much more savvy now than we were, but I'm sure there's still tons of things. If anybody could do this thing, it would be amazing. Make a website that just educates people about investment. It educates developers about investment and like how that whole thing works and what the world is. I think that would be a fantastic contribution.
And maybe if you've been to this panel before you raise your money, you might think differently.
Exactly.
You know, there's also reasons to raise money from investors. Even if you don't need their money, right? Like meaning, and someone touched on this I think in the last panel, and it's similar to the reason you might raise do a Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or Fig or whatever, because if you're going to need to raise money in the future, it's often very advantageous to have someone who's perceived as an experienced game investor on your cap table with X percentage of the company. It's like, okay, they invested, so it's sort of, you know, it's proof, right? You know, the other reason is that there's a lot of things that you probably don't want to do, like, and you know, you probably don't want to be out doing corp dev. You don't want, meaning like you're going to be making your second game soon, or you're going to be doing your Series A soon after this game, and someone's going to have to put your pitch deck together and help you raise money. That's something that, you know, we do as investors, and that's probably not something you've maybe ever done before, right? So there are things that like you can sort of offload to certain investors or partners that may be non-financial that are really critical.
I just want to add one thing. Really
quick question, because we've got to get some time for the audience as well. So yeah.
But I think just from an investor perspective, this is actually part of the reason why it's actually very hard to invest in gaming studios and company, because there's not enough ecosystem for you guys to understand. And the process is very long. And sometimes we talk to developers, spend a lot of time educating them. At the end, we can't close it, right? Because there's all kind of a COVID, right? So we can't do it. So that's the reason why, just a little bit PA, like we put together an initiative called Gaming Top Talent, and we want to go through that process with the developers and all that. So, and it's actually hard. We are generally interested, but sometimes it just takes a lot more resources and time.
Thank you to the panelists for this really informative discussion. It's been really a lot of good information. My question is for Kellee with IndieFund. Have you had pushback from developers about the 100% recoupment where they have a team that they need to continue to fund after a game is launched?
Yeah. Usually the answer comes down to the fact that the other part of our recoup is that we're just there to double the initial investment and we are completely out. So the developer will really see, you know, the much upside as they possibly can. So if they believe in their project, then it's a really great deal for them. And so that's why we do it that way.
I mean, to be fair, if you're working with a publisher, they're going to I mean, maybe you can carve out a little bit for yourself on the recoup, but chances are, maybe not.
I just wanted to know the main differences between going funding versus using Kickstarter or Indiegogo.
Well, I mean, we've had a bunch of our studios do Kickstarters and Indiegogos. In fact, we have a studio doing an Indiegogo later this week, but it's not to raise money. It's to sort of get a bunch of testers into the game for their alpha. You can't raise enough money really to fund most games on Kickstarter. I mean, it's just not a thing anymore. I mean, it kind of was for a brief window, but now if you raise $70,000 on Kickstarter, you know, this is a team of 20-year, you know, veterans. I mean, how do you think most people do? You know, and that's a pretty good raise these days, $70K. And, you know, all these crowdfunding platforms, I think I saw Bailey walk in. He's probably going to talk about Fig in the next one. But, I mean, most of these that exist now, like the people who are investing in your game or your project, they don't really understand what it costs to make a game, right? So all these sort of budgets get artificially pushed down and pushed down and pushed down over time. So people think you can make a game for $70K, right? And you can't. And so this is just compounding and compounding and compounding. And over time, it's gotten to the point where unless you're a retro, 90s IP or whatever from a famous developer, the chances of you raising actually the amount of money you need is almost nil. And secondly, it's a huge, huge pain in the ass to run these campaigns. I mean, people who've never done it don't understand how much time and effort. You're talking about man months and man months trying to get these campaigns working.
We lost about 50% of our velocity during the Kickstarter campaign.
5-0 or 1-5?
5-0.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that's in a large team, right? I mean, we did it right though. We put the effort into it that needed to be put into it. Yeah, and like he's saying, 100%. Do not underestimate how much work it is to run a successful Kickstarter campaign. You're gonna need to call in all sorts of favors as well.
I guess people think that crowdfunding is free money. You don't have to return any equity or any commercial. So there's not recoupable anything, right? It's free. But essentially, it's actually much more resources and effort you have to put in.
I just want to point out the last panel talked a little bit about most of their deals come through networks and come through referrals. And I know you touched a little bit on the fact that by working with outside capital and professional capital, you can focus on your game because you get to take advantage of their networks. Right, they're able to make referrals and help you get the next round and the next round, go from C to A and B and so on. So,
I would say I can't underscore that enough. I mean, if you're a developer, don't sit alone in your room all the time. Build your network. We would not have got a single dime of that money if we wouldn't have built our network the way we did. It's it's really large. I mean, we still don't have these guys in our network, but now we do. So, I mean, get out there, talk, go to conferences, go to game dev drink ups or whatever is in your area, build your network.
Just add one thing, don't hire an advisor to raise money on your behalf. That's the bad idea. I don't like that type of referral. Usually, actually, the best deals I get is usually my discovery. So just make yourself public there, visible, on the radar, so that way, of course you have close friends who know the right investor and all that is good, but don't hire an advisor when you are very small. Of course, when you're really big and mid-stage, that might make sense.
Personally, I think some of the best deals for entrepreneurs who are trying to raise money come from having multiple investors, multiple smaller investors rather than one large one. I know, when you see a good deal, you want to jump in, and I've actually seen entrepreneurs push back and say, no, we're only going to let you have 50% of the round because we want to have more investors. How do you all feel about that?
I mean, we love that. We know that we're not sort of the only smart money investors around, and we also like to distribute our risk. And frankly, the check sizes we're writing even if we're writing you a $500,000 check, aren't going to be enough. So we'd love to work with other investors or strategics who can add value to the project. So we're not the one sort of carrying the financial burden. So absolutely. Plus, if you can bring someone else to the table and say, we've already got half the round raised. I mean, it shows that you have sort of that entrepreneurial fire in your belly, that you're not just a game developer who wants to make art. You want to sort of build a business.
Yeah, and IndieFund is a bit of a unique situation too, where it is already a collective of individual investors, and so we started as a partnership, but now it operates as this collective of individuals, and so every project has different individuals involved in it. So that's kind of always how we operate.
So I do two types of investment: early stage and late stage. For the early stage, I like to do the first check, and then I follow on. So the first check, obviously, I will be the only one, and then the follow-on rounds, then I like to bring others, investors, to join.
I can add to that. I mean, as a kids game studio at StoryToys, we have, this is prior to our A round, 5 key investors, and one of which is semi-strategic, or it's family office of a publishing company. And we have Japanese investors who would have been involved in my previous company, just to have as many people to talk to, as many people to contribute, and the multiplying effect of your network through their network is absolutely amazing.
The question is, would we invest in a corporation or LLC? It has to be a corporation. For equity investors, it has to be a corporation.
Project base doesn't matter.
But if you're an LLC and you want to raise money, it's easy enough to convert. I mean, that's something we help people with all the time.
I think we're probably at time. So I'd like to thank the panel. A round of applause is due.